Hi everyone, welcome. Now, every year the world generates more than 2 billion tons of waste. The majority of mixed municipal solid waste still ends up in landfill, where it creates long term environmental liability, methane emissions, and rising disposable costs that operators continue absorbing rather than monetizing. Globally, more than 50 billion tons of legacy waste already sits buried in landfills, waiting for somebody to find a way to mine it economically. Meanwhile, carbon black, a $30 billion global market that supplies the tire industry, the rubber industry, plastics, inks, and coatings, is still being produced from fossil fuels, emitting 2 to 3 tons of CO2 for every ton of carbon black produced. My guest today is Brad Bilbie, the CEO of Waste Magic, an Australian company that holds a patented zero emission carbonisation technology. He has spent over 20 years building and exiting companies across property, fintech, mining, and crypto, and is now, in his words, most excited about the third act of his career, deploying industrial sustainability infrastructure at scale. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Brad, your career has run an unusually diverse arc. So, tell us, what did you see in Waste Magic specifically that made this the third act of your career, the one that actually pulled you out of every other category that you were operating in?
Yeah, so I've had a very diverse career, to say the least. Very heavy in finance and property, and also doing things, like setting up gold and diamond mining companies in Africa, which will put hairs on your chest and gives you a very different experience to life. So those were kind of my early stages of the career, and then kind of coming into after COVID and getting into a bit of blockchain and that whole world. Basically, what my experience has guided me over the years is doing business in many countries with a lot of travel, and through that I got to meet a lot of really interesting people from all sorts of different industries, but also people quite high up in government, as well as people high-end levels of finance. And these types of relationships are very handy for kind of Waste Magic, where we sit today. When I came across Waste Magic, I was already doing some consulting for a company in pyrolysis, which is a similar technology in a way, but far inferior in pretty much every aspect. So when I came across it, I was just blown away. And I was very surprised that this technology hadn't been commercially implemented yet. So I kind of jumped on the opportunity and came up with a way to commercially scale this worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. So let's get to the technology. So you take mixed, unsorted municipal waste, the messiest, hardest to process waste stream that exists, and then you put it into a closed pressure vessel with a proprietary catalyst. And what comes out the other side is industrial grade carbon black and distilled water with no smokestack and no ash. So for a viewer who's, let's say, not a chemical engineer, what is actually happening inside that pressure vessel, and why has nobody managed to do this before with mixed unsorted feedstock?
How Waste Magic works, it processes basically anything that is carbon based, right? So this is everything from plastics to wood to municipal solid waste. Basically, in Australian terms, everything from the red bin, half the stuff from the yellow bin, everything from the green bin, and everything from the blue bin. The only materials that we cannot process is metal, glass, and concrete, and they effectively come out the exact same way that they went in.
Yeah.
And what the process does is, it's a pressure vessel, reactor, autoclave, similar names for the exact same thing. In the environment of heat and pressure, 500 degrees Celsius and 10 bar of pressure, our proprietary catalyst, what it does, it cracks the atomic bond in molecules and carbonizes all organic and carbon-based matter inside the vessel. Right. So there's really only two outputs. Pure carbon black, or very close to 99% purity, and distilled water. Right. So it's a fully enclosed process. There's no burning, there's no incineration, and importantly, there's no emissions. A big advantage is the very quick processing times. So the actual carbonization time only takes about 30 minutes. But we allow for about an hour and a half to 2 hours for loading and unloading.
Right.
Now, the only other real competitor in this space is what you call waste to energy or incineration. Right. Now, the problem with waste to energy incineration is, well, it's in the name, it's incinerating, you're burning. You're creating toxic wastewater in the process. You're creating toxic pollutants and emissions. And you're also left over with about 20% left over as a toxic fly ash. Now that needs to be landfilled anyway. So all it's doing is reducing the landfill liability by 80%, creating toxins across the spectrum, right? And it's something that gets a lot of public opposition. There's a lot of serious health risks. It's banned in many places in the US, for example. So it's really has strong public opposition. And a lot of waste to energy plants actually don't end up proceeding because the public opposition is so strong. It's the classic not in my backyard scenario. Whereas with us, we're a very scalable technology and we can bring our technology to where the waste is. The problem with waste to energy is you've got a centralized system, right? So you've got all of the logistics and the transportation costs to get all the waste to where an incineration plant is. And then you're left because you need to take the toxic fly ash that's left over back to another landfill or to a different landfill. We're a one-step process and we bring the waste to where it is. So landfill mining, I think, is just this massive market. As you said in your introduction, there's 50 billion tons of waste sitting and emitting harmful methane gases at landfill. Governments and landfill owners are, under strict mandate and basically law to make sure that they're reducing those liabilities. So that's why they've got very expensive methane capture systems, and there's, a lot of taxes coming into play. And even now on waste to energy, because of the toxicity of that process, the European Union has a 40 euro tax on every ton processed through a waste to energy plant. And that's, I think from 2027, that's going to increase to 100 euros per ton. So simply your operating expenditure just in taxes, well, especially in Europe, is 100 euro per ton. So we can, we just excel on every single level because a waste to energy plant costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build and develop. It takes years to get approved, whereas we can scale within months because we're using standardized machinery that's made all over the world, sure, with a few custom tweaks, part of our process. It just means that we can get very, very quick to scale. And under our business model, we actually don't ask governments or large waste operators to pay for equipment, right? So the amount of impact that we can have. So what we're finding in many countries in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Korea, Thailand, China especially, right? These countries are so heavily committed to waste to energy that they've literally got tens of billions or collectively hundreds of billions of dollars just in this region allocated towards waste to energy infrastructure, what we call phase two. But phase two is a liability, right? Because of all of those toxic streams that I'm talking about, but the operating expenditure to run a waste to energy incineration plant is just through the roof. So for example, in Malta, where we just recently did a proposal to the government there, their total cost is about 345 euro per ton in operational expenditure alone. And that's even after they factor in the selling of the energy. And they were looking to spend 600 million euro to build one waste to energy incineration plant. Now, we can do the same thing with a capital expenditure of say $5 or $6 million. So we're 1/100th of the capex, and the opex is minimal. And we don't charge the government for any of that. We have the financial backers to fund us against government deployments. And then all we do is simply charge them a one-off fee. So it's very, very easy to get government buy-in. It's very easy to get public support as well because we're an enclosed system with no emissions. We're tackling the landfill crisis, but we're not creating any toxins in the process. And we're creating a reusable commodity in carbon black that eventually makes its way back into car tires. So we're a completely circular system. So we are really, everyone uses the word revolutionary, and which I'm not a big fan of, but there's probably no other way to describe it as impact on the industry. And we're seeing that now with many governments, on our door knocking, waiting for us to come there and present formally to them.
Yeah. Wonderful. That's truly great. And thanks for sharing that, Brad. Now let's get to the numbers. So like you've touched upon it. So you describe approximately 10 million Australian dollars of annual profit per machine at a steady state on a machine cost of 1 million. So that's 1,000% ROI per machine per year. So walk us through exactly what has to be true for that number to land, and what should the investors watching this interview should stress test before they take that number at face value?
Sure. Roughly speaking, each machine costs about $1 million landed and installed. Now, we're very supplementary to the industry. So our typical clients in Australia would be a waste transfer station, which is basically like a waste depot where all of the waste garbage trucks come in and they drop it off.
Yeah.
They might do some sorting of the waste before the majority of it ends up in landfill, right? I know everyone thinks they're doing the right thing by sorting in the bins, but the reality is that pretty much everything ends up in landfill, right? Now, we effectively install our machines in the existing premises of waste transfer stations in Australia. So for example, we had 2 clients already issued contracts in Sydney, and that's at $200 a tonne plus GST with annual increases on a 10-year contract at 2.8% per annum, right? So the expected throughput of each client is at least 2,000 tonnes per month, approximately 25,000, and that's being conservative, right?
Yeah.
So one client at 2,000 tonnes at $200 a tonne, that's $400,000 of revenue per month.
Right.
So over the year, that's $5 million, approximately $5 million of revenue on just waste processing fees.
Right.
Now we get carbon credits, but we also produce the carbon black. Most of the profit comes from the carbon black. So per machine deployed, there are 3 revenue streams. One is a waste processing fee up front, right, that we charge waste transfer stations or landfill for processing their waste, right? The reason why we can charge them $200 a tonne is their incumbent process now is they need to take all that waste to landfill. And believe it or not, most Sydney waste transfer stations don't take it to the landfill down the road. They take them to places like the Hunter Valley, 2 to 3 hours away, because the regional levies, they're less. So they save, $20 a tonne or whatever it is to transport all the waste to the Hunter Valley 2 to 3 hours away each way. So think about the carbon offset and the inefficiency of taking all the waste from a waste transfer station all the way to landfill, 2 to 3 hours away each way. And the logistics and the insurance and the fuel and the burn on tires and so on and so forth, right? So whereas if we process the waste directly at their own premises, we bypass that completely and we save them money. So there's literally no reason why a waste transfer wouldn't, would balk at $200 a tonne because we're saving them money as well as enabling them to promote themselves as being truly circular, right? Which is another benefit, which means they can get more waste contracts coming in because they can promote themselves as being circular, making a difference, right? So that's the waste processing fees. Now we get carbon credits for the process. So that's about $30 a tonne or thereabouts, call it 50 Aussie dollars roughly, because we are diverting waste from landfill with 0 emissions, right? So that's what the carbon credits are for. We can also get carbon credits for processing waste at landfill with no emissions. So effectively recycling and remediating landfill. Now the third part, which is the most profitable part, is the production of carbon black. So carbon black, as we were saying before, is a valuable commodity. It's a $30 billion a year industry. To give you some context, the lithium industry is 40 billion, right? So it's bordering on that. And that's used a lot in car tires and electric vehicles, but there's also other specialty aspects of it in conductive and specialty carbon blacks, and also in the future going into carbon graphene and graphites, which is, can use a carbon black foundation that we can build upon. So the commodity that we're producing is has so many use cases. And even if we, fully explore and saturate the $30 billion market, which let's say we do, then you can bury the carbon black in its carbon sequestration. You can bind it with soil and nutrients, and it's a really good like a soil binder, so you can bury it and get benefits that way. It also has a very high calorific content because it's effectively a super green coal. You could effectively burn it in coal stations. So there's unlimited use cases for this carbon black that comes out the back end.
Right. Absolutely. Well, big numbers, big conditions, and you're framing both, which is like what an investor wants to hear at this level.
Well, sorry, and just importantly on that. So that's why we say in Australia, a machine deployed is 1,000% ROI, right? Because there's, say, approximately $5 million of waste processing fees. There's another million so dollars or more of carbon credits. And there's even more than $5 million on the back end with the carbon credit sales. Now, we operate at extremely high profit margins, right? Because when we integrate into a waste transfer station, they pay for electricity, they pay for all amenities, and we're effectively using their floor space and they're effectively rent-free. Because we're adding such value to their business, we effectively build that into the price. So at $200 a tonne, They pay for all those other amenities that we need, which means we can scale very quickly, means we can scale under their existing licenses and use their amenities, and we effectively bolt into existing infrastructure with very low operational expenditure.
Absolutely. Very well said, Brad. Now, this is the part of the waste magic story that I think gets less airtime, and it might actually be the most strategically important as well. So, you're not just a waste management company, you're also a carbon black supplier chain disruptor. So, walk us through what it means strategically that the output of your waste process is a clean source substitute for an industrial commodity that the tire industry, rubber industry, plastic inks, and coatings all already buy at scale today.
Yes, so we are just as much a commodity and mining company effectively as we are a recycling business. And landfill mining is this term that we've coined, if you like.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's very easy to explain to investors or people in the industry in mining concepts, right? Because people are very familiar that you have an in-ground resource, then you have your mining equipment, and then you produce a commodity. For example, if you're mining iron ore at a 60% rate, or you're mining coal at whatever rate it is, or even gold, you're left with a commodity at the back end after you've processed the waste. We're effectively the same thing, but instead of looking under the ground and expensive exploration programs, we have the entire resource above ground. We can see it, we can measure it very easily, and we know exactly how much is there. Now, we convert traditional mixed solid waste to what you would find at a landfill. Our mining equipment, right, processes that at approximately a 20% conversion rate.
Right.
So for example, if we have 100 million tons of waste, after processing, we get about 20 million tons of carbon black. Okay. Now, carbon black, as we were saying before, is an industry predominantly made by what you call the furnace method. It's a very inefficient process. And you need 1.5 tons of oil basically to make 1 ton of carbon black. So oil is a massive market actually consumed by the carbon black industry. So they burn it and incinerate it at over 1,000 degrees. And what you're left with after burning up 1.5 tons of oil, you're left with a ton of carbon black at the end of the day. So there's some really interesting aspects of that. Now, one is that means that carbon black will always have a minimum price floor, right? The price of carbon black is always determined by the price of oil, because you need 1.5 tons of oil to make 1 ton of carbon black. But very importantly, the carbon black industry is incredibly pollutant. There are 2 to 3 tons of CO2 produced for every ton of carbon black created. So if you break that down in numbers that we can all relate to, what that means is that even if the car tire industry decided to only buy sustainable carbon black from us, the net result would be the equivalent of pulling 7 million cars off the road. Right? That's actually how much pollutants come from the traditional carbon black industry.
Yeah. Wow. Very interesting indeed to learn that. Now, Brad, let's talk about the China opportunity. So 4 landfill projects, 40 to 100 million tons each, indicative economics at $30 per ton, and a single 100 million ton site representing $3 billion of processing fees before carbon sales and credits. So for the investors watching this, what is currently signed, if you can tell us that? What is currently verbal agreement awaiting the July testing and demonstration? And what should an investor understand about how far through that contact pathway Waste Magic is today?
Yeah, with China, it is the largest waste industry or waste country on the planet, right? That's where the biggest opportunity exists. Now, China is actually incredibly proactive. They've got thousands and thousands of waste to energy plants. They've invested hundreds of billions and built maybe even trillions of dollars building waste to energy incineration infrastructure. And most of the other countries, especially around Southeast Asia, they import waste to energy plants from China. Now, the reason why we've specifically gone with China, and we have had one of our staff members on the ground now for 2 years in China, and he speaks fluent Chinese, which is helpful. And he's been the kind of architect of dealing with local government there. Now, there are, subject to a live demonstration, which is the process of what we're about to go through, they will enter into a contract with us for 4 landfills. The average the average across the 4 landfills is about 280 million tonnes. Right. The deal that's been agreed with them, it is verbal for now because they don't put things in writing, because often people use those to shout around and raise investment because they don't like doing that. But the agreement, verbally agreed, is that after a live demonstration, that they will give us 4 landfills to remediate with approximately 280 million tonnes of waste. Now, at only $30 a tonne, which is very, very low processing fees, right? That's much less than what it costs to run a waste-to-energy plant. But as a great foundation client, it's fantastic. The reason why this is so good is China is the leader in the world when it comes to waste-to-energy. So if the leaders of an entire province in China prioritize our technology over a waste-to-energy plant, that gives us the validation anywhere in the world. No one will ever ask us, does your technology work, or give us, question any validation of any form. But from a financial perspective, it's also amazing, right? There's about $8 billion of waste processing fees, just in the waste processing fees. You can expect about double that when you factor in the carbon credits. And then over the course of that landfill mining operation, which might take 3 or 4 years, there's about another $50 billion of carbon black sales, at current market value, right? Or even conservative market value. So that's just instant scale. That's just one of those contracts that you get in and you just scale infinitely. The really good thing about that scenario as well is what's been verbally agreed is that they will actually pay for the manufacture of all of our machines required to service that big landfill mining contract. Now, the Chinese government is smart like that, right? It means that they effectively fund it. It stimulates their local economy, which is what the local government tries to do. It puts hundreds of machines into being built, and they build up a bit of infrastructure around being able to replicate our machines at scale. Now, we effectively buy the machines back off accounts billable. So, because under our model, we always own the equipment, because we always want to own the 3 revenue streams that come from it. So it effectively, we're like machine as a service. Your software as a service, and we're effectively some machine as a service. And so China is just a fantastic validation pathway for us to get infinite scale and get a great return for investors, because we scale the valuation significantly. On that one contract, there's over $50 billion of revenue. And I know those numbers sound ridiculous, but that's what it is. So we can instantly value the company at whatever multiple you want to put on that.
Wonderful. Truly wonderful, Brad. Thanks for explaining that with the candor that it deserves. Now, Brad, talk to us about the near-term commercial reality. So what is the realistic timeline for the first machine to be operating in Australia, and what does the licensee model actually unlock in terms of capital efficiency?
So there's 2 parts to that. One is the areas that we want to be owner-operator in, and then there's other is that we do a licensee model. So we want to be the owner-operator basically in Southeast Asia, including Australia. Now, the reason for that is that most of the world's carbon black is consumed in Southeast Asia. So the 2 largest tire manufacturers in the world are China and Thailand, right? So there's no point making a lot of carbon black over in somewhere else around the world and then shipping it all the way to China, who's the main purchaser of it, right? So we save on logistics and duties and imports and stuff like that. But so time frame scale, from filming of this video, if you like, we should be doing a live demonstration in China within 3 months. Now, upon that live demonstration, we immediately enter into a contract for those 4 landfills, and then we would immediately start mass manufacturing for that contract. Australia is a little bit different. So we have 2 clients now. They're about to come online in about 10 months from now. So call it second quarter of 2027, because they're new waste transfer stations that are about to open, and they want to open with our technology installed in both of those. They're actually both coming online in a similar time. It's a slightly harder pathway in Australia, because you need what's called a thermal waste processing schedule in your EPL license, your environmental protection license. So it takes a number of months to get that in place, but it's okay. I mean, that's relatively easy to do, and after we do the first 1 or 2, I'm sure it'll be a much easier process. But that is also a benefit of Southeast Asia. We don't, because we are an enclosed system, there's no burning. It's only water vapor that gets captured and turned into distilled water. It's a very, very easy process for EPA approvals offshore.
Truly wonderful, Brad. Thanks for sharing that. Now, as a parting question for our audience, what's the single most important thing that you'll want them to take away from the interview about Waste Magic that, let's say, they won't get from reading the investor material alone?
I think it really has to be profit with a purpose. Profit with a purpose. Everything that we've designed around this business is solving one of the biggest crises that challenges humanity, right? It's up there at the top. All these landfills all over the world that are, sitting on billions of dollars of land, by the way. They're emitting, people talk about carbon as if it's the enemy or something. Doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit on in that regard. Everyone agrees that methane and greenhouse gases are serious pollutants and are very, very bad, right? So that's a huge problem that we're tackling. And just improving the communities and creating truly circular systems. So we have the capabilities, through various technologies that exist today to create better environments and better communities. And after we're profitable and after we're listed, we will turn into more of a philanthropic company. There are many nations that we can actually go in and completely transform the lives of entire countries. There are places in the Pacific Islands like Tuvalu, Kiribati. We're actually coming up with programs as to how we can completely transform these nations. What happens is, in these small little countries, they've got so much pollution that it's all seeped into the soil where they can't even grow crops anymore. Which means they need to import all of their packaged and processed food, which has two bad effects. Means that their waste goes up considerably more because there's more packaging to deal with every year. And also the diet of the local people gets even worse as well. So there's health issues related to that. So, but they just don't have a solution to process waste on these small little islands. So, we will become very philanthropic after we've, reached all of our goals of being operational in at least a few countries. But there's definitely a humanitarian side to this company, and that will be the prevailing factor after 2 or 3 years when we've listed the company and we've got a big balance sheet. We will focus our efforts on philanthropic activity.
That's truly wonderful, Brad, and thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us. For our audience, the reframe at the center of this conversation is that Waste Magic is not just a waste management company. As you learned from our conversation with Brad, it is a clean source disruptor of a $30 billion global industrial commodity market. The tire industry, the rubber industry, plastics, inks and coatings, all of them already buy carbon black at scale today, and all of them are buying it from a fossil fuel based supply chain that emits 2 to 3 tons of CO2 per year produced. But a patented process that converts waste into the same commodity cleanly changes the supply economics of an entire industrial category. The details about Waste Magic are on your screen now, so please feel free to scan the QR code and get in touch with the team at Waste Magic, and Brad or his team will get back to you. Once again, thank you everyone for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.